All right, welcome. Today, we're going to dive into a whole new way of looking at the Quran. Think of it less like just a book and more like a conversation, one that happened in a very specific time and place. And we're going to see how understanding that original world can totally change what we get from its pages today. So let's jump right in.
You know that feeling, right? When you're reading something really, really old and you just know you're missing something. It's like there's this whole other layer of meaning, this incredible nuance, hiding just below the surface. But you can't quite reach it. Well, that's exactly what we're going to tackle today. We're going on a hunt for the keys to unlock that world.
And here it is. This is the heart of the whole challenge. A staggering 1,400 years separate us from the time the Quran was revealed. And that's not just a number, you know? It's a massive gap in culture and language and in just the entire way people lived and saw the world. So if we want a deeper reading, bridging that gap has to be step one.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We've got a roadmap with a few key stops. First, we'll put on our language lens to really get the words. Then, we'll switch to a history and scripture lens to see the world it was born into. After that, we'll look through the communal law lens to understand its social structure. And finally, we'll pull it all together to see how it creates a whole new way to read. First up, the language lens. Now, obviously the Quran was revealed in Arabic, but understanding it is about so much more than just knowing the vocabulary. It's really about trying to step back in time, into the very world where that specific language was spoken. See, every language is completely tangled up with the culture that speaks it. They're inseparable. So because the Quran came in Arabic, it's packed with the socio-cultural context of 7th century Arabia. We're talking about its idioms, its customs, its entire worldview, all the stuff that its very first audience would have understood instantly, without even thinking about it. And this brings us to a really, really crucial point. The classical Arabic of the Quran, it's not the same as the Arabic people speak today. Not at all. Languages change over time, right? Words evolve. So if we just slap a modern definition onto an ancient word, we're running a huge risk of missing the original meaning completely. We've just lost that connection to how it was used in the real world, day to day. Okay, let's move on to our second lens, history and scripture. This is so important because the Quran didn't just appear out of thin air. It dropped into a world that was already buzzing with dialogue, part of a huge conversation that had been going on for centuries within that shared Abrahamic tradition. So the Quran actually presents itself as the next step in a long line of scriptures. You have the Torah, right? Then the Injil, or the Gospel, comes along and is seen as amending some of the laws of the Torah. Then the Quran is presented as amending and, well, lightening those laws even further. It's not about wiping the slate clean, it's about building on what was already there. And this scriptural context is just key. The Quran often just assumes its audience is familiar with the stories and laws from the Torah and the Injil. A perfect example is the Sabbath. The Quran talks about it like it's a practice everyone already knows. Then it introduces the Friday Jumu'ah prayer. But it's not a new Sabbath, it's its own unique thing, a different kind of gathering that for the Muslim community essentially replaces the old Sabbath rules. What's fascinating is that this historical context wasn't static, it changed over time. In the early days, back in Mecca, the big debate was with the Mushrikun, the polytheists of Arabia. It was all about this radical new idea of just one God. But later, when the community moved to Medina, things shifted. They were now living alongside and interacting with established Jewish and Christian communities. So the debates got way more theologically detailed, digging into complex ideas like the nature of God or who counts as a chosen people.
And this history, it's not just some background noise. It's baked right into the text itself. The Quran makes direct references to specific events, like the Battle of Badr. It mentions specific companions by name, and it deals with pre-Islamic customs head-on. If you know the stories behind these references, it's like a whole new, richer layer of meaning just opens up in the verses.
All right, this leads us perfectly into our third lens, the communal law lens. This one requires a bit of a perspective shift, away from the individual and towards the group. A lot of the laws you find in the Quran start to make a whole lot more sense when you stop thinking of them as just personal rules and start seeing them as broad principles for governing an entire society. So, think about it. If we read these laws only through our modern, super individualistic lens, how does this rule apply to me personally? Some of them can be pretty confusing or honestly even offensive. But what if we shift our view? What if we see them as general principles designed to make a whole society function back in the 7th century? Suddenly, the logic behind them often becomes way clearer. Let's take a concrete example. There's a rule concerning financial contracts where the testimony of 2 women might be needed in place of 1 man. Now, through our modern, individualistic lens, that can sound pretty bad, right? But if we apply that communal and historical lens, the reasoning starts to emerge. We have to remember, this was a society where men handled almost all public business and legal contracts. So the law was designed as a kind of safeguard, based on a general assumption about that context, that women, who weren't really in that sphere, might be more likely to be swayed or make a mistake in a dispute. It was a broad societal rule for that time, not some universal statement about the integrity of every single woman. So, when you put all these lenses together, the language, the history, and the community, it leads you to a totally different way of approaching the text. It's a mindset, really. It's about humility and about having a genuine desire to just understand.
So here's the core advice, the big takeaway. For a moment, just try to suspend your own context, your 21st century culture, your immediate reactions, even your offense. Before you judge it, just listen. The goal is simply to try and understand what the text is actually communicating on its own terms, in its own world. A world that was, let's be honest, profoundly different from ours. And this quote, it just perfectly captures the whole idea. It's an invitation, really, an invitation to approach the text not as a judge ready to pass sentence, but as a student ready to learn. It's about letting the text be the big primary voice in the room and just listening, trying to understand its world first, before we even think about applying it to ours. And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. This whole idea, it's not just about the Quran, is it? Think about it. Applying this kind of discipline, this effort to seek context, to really try and bridge the gap between their world and ours, that could change how we read any historical document, any ancient philosophy, heck, even the story of our own cultures. It's really a tool for deeper understanding absolutely everywhere.